Captain Marcus Sterling had served the royal family of Valdoria for 15 years, but nothing prepared him for what he discovered on that cold November morning. The palace corridors echoed with his measured footsteps as he made his routine security rounds, checking each wing with the precision of a man who took his duties seriously. Queen Isabella had always been different from the previous queens. Where others displayed their wealth openly, she moved through the palace with quiet grace. Her charitable work, known but never flaunted, the people loved her for it, seeing her as a breath of fresh air in the ancient monarchy. Marcus paused outside the queen's private study. Through the slightly open door, he glimpsed her bent over her desk, writing checks with focused determination. This wasn't unusual. The queen often handled her charitable donations personally, but something about her expression caught his attention. She looked troubled, almost desperate. The following week brought an unexpected assignment. The king's advisor, Lord Pemberton, summoned Marcus to his office. The man's face bore the weight of concern as he closed the heavy oak door behind them. "Captain Sterling," Pemberton began, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need someone we can trust completely. There have been irregularities in the palace accounts." Marcus straightened in his chair. Financial irregularities were serious matters in any institution, but in the royal palace, they could mean scandal of the highest order. "The Queen's personal charitable account has shown unusual activity," Pemberton continued. "Large sums, far exceeding her normal donations. The king is unaware, and we'd like to investigate discreetly before bringing it to his attention." The assignment felt wrong to Marcus. Queen Isabella had shown nothing but kindness and integrity in all his years of service. But duty demanded he accept the task. Over the next several days, Marcus found himself observing the queen more closely. Her routine remained unchanged. Morning tea in the garden, afternoon meetings with various charity representatives, evening dinners with the king. Yet there was something in her manner, a weight she carried that hadn't been there before. The investigation led him to track the queen's movements outside the palace. 3 times a week, she left in an unmarked car, dismissing her usual security detail. Marcus followed at a distance, his unmarked vehicle blending with the city traffic. The queen's destinations surprised him. Instead of the upscale charity galas or foundation offices he expected, she went to the poorest districts of the capital. She entered rundown buildings, stayed for hours, and left looking more exhausted each time. On the 5th day of surveillance, Marcus decided to investigate one of these buildings after the queen departed. The structure stood in the heart of the old industrial district, its brick facade crumbling with age. Inside, he found something that made his blood run cold. The building housed dozens of people, families crowded into small rooms, children playing in narrow hallways, elderly residents sitting in a makeshift common area. But these weren't ordinary citizens down on their luck. As Marcus looked closer, he recognized faces from the palace staff registry, former employees, dismissed over the years for various reasons. An elderly woman approached him, her face familiar, though he couldn't place it immediately. "You're from the palace," she said, not a question but a statement. "Has she sent you to check on us?" "She?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Queen Isabella. She's the only reason we survive." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "When the palace dismissed us, some for age, others for minor mistakes, we had nowhere to go, no pension, no support. The queen found us, one by one. She pays our rent, brings food, even arranges medical care." Marcus spent the next hour listening to stories that shook his understanding of palace life. Servants dismissed without cause when new management arrived. Guards let go after injuries sustained protecting the royal family. Kitchen staff released when the palace modernized its operations. Each had been left without support, and each had been secretly rescued by Queen Isabella. The scale of the operation staggered him. The queen wasn't just helping a few former employees. She was supporting hundreds of people, entire families who had once served the crown and been discarded. That evening, Marcus returned to the palace with a heavy heart. The irregularities in the queen's accounts weren't signs of corruption or personal gain. They were evidence of a massive, secret humanitarian effort. The queen was using her personal wealth, and apparently going into debt, to support those the palace had abandoned. But this revelation brought new concerns. If the queen was spending such vast sums, where was the money coming from? Her personal allowance, while generous, couldn't possibly cover such expenses. And why the secrecy? Why not simply advocate for better retirement benefits for palace staff? As Marcus compiled his preliminary report, he noticed something else troubling in the financial records. The dismissals of palace staff had increased dramatically over the past 3 years, coinciding with Lord Pemberton's appointment as the king's chief advisor, the same man who had assigned Marcus to investigate the Queen. Late that night, Marcus made a decision that went against protocol. Instead of filing his report with Lord Pemberton, he would dig deeper. Something larger was at play here, and Queen Isabella might not be the one who needed investigating. He thought of the Queen's troubled expression, the desperation he'd seen as she wrote those checks. She was fighting a battle alone, trying to right wrongs that shouldn't exist in the first place. And now, Marcus realized, someone wanted to stop her. The palace archives held secrets dating back centuries, and Marcus spent his off-duty hours searching through employment records. What he discovered made his investigation even more urgent. The pattern of dismissals wasn't random. It targeted specific departments, always those with the longest-serving, most loyal employees. 3 nights later, Marcus followed Queen Isabella to a different location. This time, she entered a modest church on the outskirts of the city. Through a window, he watched her meet with Father Antonio, an elderly priest who had once served as the palace chaplain before his sudden retirement 5 years ago. Their conversation appeared intense. The Queen handed over several thick envelopes, and Father Antonio's expression grew grave as she spoke. When she left an hour later, Marcus saw tears on her face. Unable to resist, Marcus entered the church after ensuring the Queen's car had departed. Father Antonio sat in a pew, his head bowed in prayer. He looked up as Marcus approached, seeming unsurprised by the visit. "You're the guard who's been following Her Majesty," the priest said calmly. "She told me someone might come." Marcus sat beside him, choosing honesty. "I'm trying to understand what's happening, Father." "The Queen trusts you." Father Antonio studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know why I left the palace, Captain?" "I was told my services were no longer required after 20 years. No explanation, no ceremony, just a letter of dismissal signed by Lord Pemberton." The priest continued. "Isabella found me months later, living in a small apartment, struggling to make ends meet. She was horrified. She told me this had been happening to many others, loyal servants, cast aside like broken tools." "But why the secrecy?" Marcus asked. "Why doesn't she tell the king?" Father Antonio's expression darkened. "Because the king trusts Lord Pemberton completely. The advisor has convinced him that modernizing the palace requires difficult decisions. Isabella tried to speak against it once, and Pemberton suggested she was being too emotional, too soft-hearted for royal duties." The priest stood and walked to a small office behind the altar. He returned with a ledger, thick with entries in the Queen's handwriting. "She asks me to help distribute the funds. There are so many now, nearly 300 families depending on her generosity." Marcus examined the ledger, his mind reeling at the amounts. "Father, where does she get this money?" "At first, from her personal accounts. Then she sold her private jewelry collection, pieces inherited from her grandmother that weren't part of the crown jewels. Last month," Father Antonio paused, pain crossing his features. "Last month she took out loans using her mother's estate as collateral." The weight of this revelation struck Marcus hard. The Queen was bankrupting herself to support the crown's discarded servants, and now Pemberton had set an investigation in motion, likely knowing exactly what Marcus would find. Returning to the palace before dawn, Marcus accessed the security footage archives. If Pemberton was orchestrating these dismissals, there had to be evidence. He searched through hours of recordings, looking for patterns. Then he found it. Late-night meetings between Pemberton and representatives from Cromwell Industries, a company that provided modernized staffing solutions to large institutions. The same company that now supplied the palace with temporary workers who received no benefits, no job security, and could be dismissed without cause. The scheme became clear. Pemberton was receiving kickbacks for converting the palace's permanent staff to temporary contractors. The money saved on benefits and pensions went partly to Cromwell Industries' inflated fees, and partly, Marcus suspected, into Pemberton's own accounts. As dawn broke, Marcus made copies of everything. The security footage, the employment records, Father Antonio's ledger. But as he prepared to take his evidence to the king, he received an urgent message on his phone. "Captain Sterling, report to my office immediately." Lord Pemberton. Marcus's blood ran cold. Somehow, Pemberton knew. The advisor's office felt like a trap as Marcus entered. Pemberton sat behind his massive desk, a thin smile playing on his lips. Two palace security officers stood by the door. Men Marcus recognized as recent hires, loyal to Pemberton rather than the crown. Captain Sterling, Pemberton began, his voice smooth as silk. I understand you've been quite thorough in your investigation. Perhaps too thorough. I've done my duty, sir, Marcus replied carefully. Have you? Pemberton leaned back in his chair. Your duty was to investigate the Queen's financial irregularities. Instead, you've been accessing restricted archives, following Her Majesty without authorization, and conducting unauthorized interviews. Pemberton opened a folder on his desk. I have here a report suggesting you've been stalking the Queen, possibly with intentions of blackmail. Such serious accusations, Captain, your word against mine. Who do you think the King will believe? Marcus remained silent, his mind racing. Pemberton had anticipated this, prepared for it. However, Pemberton continued, I'm not an unreasonable man. Resign quietly, leave the capital, and this report disappears. Stay and fight, and you'll find yourself in prison before nightfall. And the Queen? Marcus asked. Will face the consequences of her financial mismanagement. The King will be disappointed, of course, but he'll understand the need for adjustment in her responsibilities. Marcus saw the full picture now. Pemberton would use the Queen's secret charity to destroy her influence, painting her as financially irresponsible. The King, trusting his advisor, would restrict her freedom, perhaps even consider annulment. Meanwhile, the scheme to exploit palace workers would continue. I need time to consider, Marcus said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. Pemberton replied. Oh. And Captain, your palace access has been temporarily restricted. Security will escort you to your quarters. As the guards led him away, Marcus's mind worked furiously. He had evidence, but Pemberton had power. He had truth, but Pemberton had the King's ear. And somewhere in the palace, Queen Isabella continued her desperate mission, unaware that the walls were closing in around her. Confined to his quarters, Marcus had only hours to act. His window overlooked the palace gardens where Queen Isabella took her morning walks. As dawn approached, he wrote a coded message on paper and waited. When the Queen passed below his window, accompanied by her guards, Marcus dropped the weighted note precisely into a flower bed she always stopped to admire. He watched her pause, discreetly retrieve the paper, and continue her walk without reaction. She had understood. 2 hours later, Marcus heard commotion in the corridor. His door burst open, but instead of Pemberton's guards, trusted palace security stood there. Men, he had trained himself. Captain, one said urgently, Her Majesty requests your immediate presence. They escorted him not to the Queen's chambers, but to the King's private study. Inside, he found an unexpected gathering. King Alexander, Queen Isabella, Father Antonio, and, surprisingly, the elderly woman from the shelter. Pemberton was notably absent. King Alexander's face showed a mixture of shock and fury. Captain Sterling, he said, his voice controlled but angry. My wife has just shared the most extraordinary story. I need you to confirm every detail. For the next hour, Marcus presented his evidence. The King examined each document, watched the security footage, and listened to Father Antonio's testimony. The elderly woman, introduced as Martha, the palace's former head of household staff, shared her own story of dismissal after 30 years of service. The King's expression grew darker with each revelation. When Marcus finished, the room fell silent. King Alexander stood and walked to the window, his back to them all. Isabella, he said quietly, why didn't you tell me? The Queen's voice was steady but emotional. Every time I tried, Pemberton was there with explanations, statistics, recommendations from business consultants. He made me sound like a foolish woman clinging to outdated traditions. I thought if I could just help them quietly until I found solid proof. You bankrupted yourself, the King said, turning to face her. You sold your grandmother's jewels. You mortgaged your mother's estate. They served us loyally, Isabella replied, tears in her eyes. We owed them more than abandonment. King Alexander crossed to his wife and took her hands. You did what I failed to do. Protect our people. Can you forgive me for being so blind? The reunion was interrupted by urgent knocking. A guard entered, breathless. Your Majesties, Lord Pemberton is in the throne room with several council members and journalists. He's making an announcement about financial irregularities in the royal household. The king's eyes flashed with determination. Then let's give him an audience he won't forget. The throne room buzzed with confusion as the royal couple entered, followed by Marcus, Father Antonio, and Martha. Pemberton stood at the podium, papers in hand, his confident expression faltering at the sight of them all together. Your Majesty, Pemberton began, recovering quickly. I was just explaining the unfortunate situation regarding the Queen's accounts. Were you? King Alexander's voice carried across the room. Then perhaps you can also explain these documents showing your connection to Cromwell Industries, or these records of kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, or this evidence of you systematically dismissing loyal staff to line your own pockets. The color drained from Pemberton's face as palace guards moved to block the exits. The journalists, sensing a bigger story, turned their attention from Pemberton to the king. Lord Pemberton has betrayed our trust and exploited our people, the king announced. But worse, he attempted to frame Queen Isabella, who alone showed the compassion and courage to help those he discarded. King Alexander continued, his voice growing stronger. Effective immediately, Lord Pemberton is stripped of all titles and positions. He will face trial for embezzlement and fraud. Captain Marcus Sterling is promoted to Chief of Royal Security, with immediate authority to investigate all of Pemberton's appointments and decisions. The throne room erupted in chaos as guards arrested Pemberton. Through it all, Marcus watched Queen Isabella, seeing the relief and vindication in her eyes. Over the following weeks, the palace underwent a transformation. Every dismissed employee was offered reinstatement with full benefits and back pay. Those who had moved on were granted proper pensions. Father Antonio returned as palace chaplain, and Martha resumed her position as head of household staff. The investigation revealed that Pemberton had embezzled millions through various schemes. The recovered funds not only repaid Queen Isabella's debts but established a proper welfare fund for all palace employees. One evening, as Marcus made his rounds as the new chief of security, he found the Queen in her study, once again writing checks. But this time, her expression was peaceful. Still managing your charities, Your Majesty? He asked. She smiled. Yes, but now it's all official. The king has established the Royal Benevolent Fund, and I'm its director. No more secrets, no more personal bankruptcy. You risked everything, Marcus observed. Your reputation, your marriage, your position. I risked nothing that truly mattered, Isabella replied. Those people gave their lives in service to the crown. How could I value my comfort over their survival? As Marcus left the Queen to her work, he reflected on the lessons learned. The palace had always prided itself on tradition and loyalty, but somewhere along the way, it had forgotten that loyalty must flow both ways. It took one woman's secret rebellion and one guard's determination to uncover the truth, to restore that balance. The scandal made headlines for weeks, but what endured was the transformation it brought. The palace became known not just for its grandeur, but for its humanity. Other royal houses across the world took notice, implementing similar protections for their staff. And in the quiet moments between ceremonies and state functions, Marcus would sometimes catch Queen Isabella visiting with the palace staff, checking on their families, listening to their concerns, no longer in secret, but openly, proudly. As a queen who understood that true nobility lay not in titles or wealth, but in how one treats those who depend on you. Lord Pemberton's trial resulted in a lengthy prison sentence, and his schemes were fully dismantled. But more importantly, his attempt to destroy Queen Isabella had instead revealed her true character to the world. She became beloved not just as a queen, but as a champion of the forgotten, a woman who chose compassion over comfort and integrity over ease. Years later, when historians wrote of King Alexander's reign, they would note it as the period when the monarchy rediscovered its heart, and at the center of that transformation stood Queen Isabella, whose secret charity had nearly cost her everything but ultimately saved the soul of the kingdom itself.